The Philips 243S1 is a Full HD IPS monitor that has USB-C connectivity and also an Ethernet port. It's very much aimed for the office crowd and indeed those who are working from home. Now, in this review, you're seeing if it's actually worth its price tag, because in the UK it can be found for roughly £280. Now, to kick off, I wanted to see how accurate its 24-inch IPS panel was, and when I put it across my Datacolor SpiderX Elite, I noted a 99.8% sRGB gamut coverage and a 136.3% gamma volume. You can see here it also does pretty well across the Adobe RGB and DCI-P3 standards. Note, however, this was when set to the sRGB mode through the OSD, and despite this fact I noted a average LTE of 2.06 and a maximum of 4.27, which doesn't make it as color accurate as one might expect, specifically given its price tag and the fact that its target market might be looking for a pinpoint sRGB color accurate monitor, and as a result this monitor isn't quite it. Now, given it's an IPS panel, it's no surprise that its contrast ratio won't compete with the VA alternatives out there on the market. Nevertheless, I had it tested at a very respectable 924:1 using my Calibrite CC Display Plus calibrator. Moving on to luminance, I noted a peak brightness of 300 nits and a minimum of 67 nits, which I suspect will suffice for a lot of consumers out there. However, something to note is that if you run it on terms of its sRGB emulation mode through the OSD, and thus in order for you to get the best sort of color accuracy, albeit not all that great in the grander scheme of things, you'll find that the brightness is actually locked at 100%, in other words 300 nits, which will make it a little bit cumbersome to do any sort of image editing or video grading in lower ambient light conditions. Now, thankfully, the 6500 Kelvin option that you can find through the OSD is actually very similar when it comes to overall color accuracy. I had it tested, and to be quite honest, the two results are very similar, and as a result here I suspect most people will run it on 6500 Kelvin option, knowing that it has a similar sort of color accuracy as the sRGB emulation mode, and yet won't be locked in terms of running the monitor at its max brightness of 300 nits. Now, on the subject of brightness, we get on to uniformity, and of course this is somewhat panel lottery, and on my tested monitor I had a little bit of brightness uniformity anomalies around the right hand side. Similarly, when it comes to overall backlight bleed, of course this is an IPS panel and thus will have it of certain nature, I noted a little bit of glow at the top sides of the monitor. Now, is this acceptable? Well, in my opinion, perfectly yes, and specifically given that this monitor won't be used in a complete pitch black room, at least not what I suspect, here I find that most people will be content with its performance. Now, with the image quality aside, let me just quickly touch upon gaming, and I appreciate this is not a gaming centric panel, but given my experience I just thought to share my input. Now, here the monitor runs Full HD at 75Hz, that can be achieved over HDMI or DisplayPort or indeed USB Type-C. Now here, in terms of the overall input lag of the monitor, it's somewhat average, at least for a budget 75Hz Full HD panel, but won't compete with gaming centric panels. As for its response time, the OSD offers a variety of different response time settings, and here the faster setting, so not the fastest setting, is the best, at least in my opinion. Here you'll get a better response time from the monitor, and on the flip side you'll get very little inverse ghosting. If you go on the maximum overdrive setting, you'll find that the overall inverse ghosting that you are getting is a little bit too noticeable, to the point where it'll throw off your sort of game or indeed the overall experience that you're getting from the Philips monitor. Now, what I'm trying to convey over here is the Philips monitor is indeed not a gaming centric panel and will suffice for casual gamers. If however you're a bit more of a serious gamer, here you'll have to sacrifice some of the features that this Philips monitor offers. In other words, let's say the RJ45 port to the USB Type-C connectivity, in favor, for example, of a more responsive panel. For example, the AOC24G2U5 or the AOC24G2U would be my top picks for gamers who also want a very color accurate display. So moving on to the monitor's OSD, I really love the fact that Philips has integrated outward facing physical buttons at the side of the monitor, which makes it very easy to adjust certain settings. So for example, here we've got low blue mode, you've got different level increments for you to choose from, and this will of course bypass your other color settings. Input is self-explanatory, and as for picture, here are my settings. Of course, brightness, contrast and sharpness will be very much dependent on your own ambient light conditions, and as for sparse response, as I did reference before, I would run it on faster if you're running any sort of gaming content. If not, then just leave it disabled. As for pixel orbiting, you might want to enable this in an office environment. It prolongs the somewhat life of the monitor, but other than that, you might want to leave these other options disabled, but it is very much subjective. Now, as for the audio, it's got two built-in speakers. They're pretty tinny sounding, to be quite honest with you. They will definitely suffice for basic Windows notification or basic music listening, but quite frankly, I was left a little bit disappointed given what this monitor is aimed at. Nevertheless, you can adjust the volume there and of course disable it if you so wish. Now, as for the color temperature, I suspect most people will be running on the 6500 Kelvin option. There's a few for you to choose from, including native, and indeed there's the sRGB mode that I referenced before, but that will lock the peak brightness and indeed lock it at 100%, which might not be quite convenient for certain people out there. Finally, in terms of the OSD settings and the USB settings, they're pretty self-explanatory. The main thing to be bearing in mind over here is in 3D setup one, you have got the power LED, which resides at the front of the monitor, which you can disable or indeed go via different level increments. And as for the DP out multi-stream, you can choose clone or extend. So with my settings out of the way, I should just quickly touch upon the build quality and of course the stand. Now, first off, on the latter, the stand provides a fully adjustable experience. In other words, you've got height, tilt, pivot and also rotation. It's quite nice that this monitor is really versatile and unlike some of its competitors does not have a fixed stand. Of course, if you do not want to use the built-in stand, you can replace it by a VESA compatible stand and therefore have it on a multi-monitor setup, for example if you have monitor arms. Now, on that note, the monitor has a 3-side borderless design and indeed doesn't take too much space on your desk or indeed in terms of your setup. At least in my opinion, I think it looks pretty visually appealing, and given the fact that the monitor is finished in kind of a greyish blackish finish and got a brushed aluminium type of a look at the rear, it will certainly appeal to a lot of consumers out there. Now, one of its key selling points, at least in my opinion, is connectivity. It's got a singular HDMI 1.4 port, a singular DisplayPort 1.2 port, and a singular USB Type-C Gen 2 3.2 port. Now, this port also delivers 65 watts of power, so therefore it allows you to charge your laptop while simultaneously using the monitor. A quite handy inclusion, but of course one might expect this from a modern USB Type-C monitor. Now, elsewhere you've also got a DisplayPort output, and this is quite handy if you want to daisy chain monitors. So for example, if you have this Philips monitor as your primary output and it's connected over to your computer, and you then have a secondary monitor that has a DisplayPort input, you can plug in a DisplayPort straight from the secondary monitor to your primary monitor, in other words the Philips monitor, and therefore saves you from having an extra port taken up on your GPU, or in other words your laptop. So this is quite handy for those people, let's say for example running a laptop setup, you'd connect over USB Type-C straight to the monitor, in other words the Philips monitor, and from there you'd have a DisplayPort going out from it to another monitor. Now, elsewhere, Philips have also integrated a 3.5mm headphone jack output, which can be quite handy for headphone users, and then there's 4 USB Type-A ports, 2 of which are found conveniently on the side of the monitor, while the other 2 are a little bit more harder to access and are found below the monitor. Now here, of course, you have got another feature, and that's the RJ45 Ethernet input. Now this can be quite handy for those people who want to use it for wake on LAN, so in other words in an office scenario, or for example for laptop users who are connected over USB Type-C to the monitor and therefore get a faster internet connection instead of connecting wirelessly, in other words via Wi-Fi. The reason I point this out is because a lot of modern laptops, specifically thinner ones, do not have RJ45 inputs, and therefore given the monitor does, it can be a good way of getting good internet speeds, all while still giving you that compact form factor from the laptop that you've chosen. And so this brings me on to my verdict. Can I see myself recommending the Philips 243S1? While it does quite a few good things, it also is a little bit disappointing when it comes to its overall sRGB color accuracy, specifically given its emulation mode locks the brightness. Now here, there's some alternatives that you might want to consider. And while I haven't personally tested them, upon research these monitors seem to tick a lot of the same boxes and come in at a cheaper price tag. Indeed, there's some monitors which are literally near identical in terms of what this Philips monitor offers, but come in at roughly £80 cheaper in the UK, which can be quite substantial when you add up multiple monitors if you're having a multi-monitor setup. Elsewhere, there are monitors that do not have, let's say, USB Type-C connectivity and or do not have, let's say, the RJ45 input or a fully ergonomic base and therefore stand, but come in yet again at a much cheaper price and therefore make it a worthwhile alternative to consider if you don't need said features. Now, of course, that's just my subjective opinion and, of course, review of the monitor, so I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts in a comment section below. Now, if you've liked this independent detailed review, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification, all of which will be greatly appreciated. And as such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.